Good morning and welcome. Good noon. Happy midday, everyone. I don't know where we're at. Just kidding, midday. And we're so glad that you joined us today. And we are in for a huge treat with Andy this morning, this day. I'm sorry, Andy. We're in for a great treat. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Andy Lau, and he is going to introduce himself a little more and tell us what we're going to learn today.
All right, thank you. I'm glad to be here. So I'm Andy Lau, and I was the founder of STAR T, Secondary Trauma Activates Resiliency Training, and I'm excited to be a part of this four-part series to really create like a learning environment to share a lot of the strategies and the concepts that we've discovered in terms of how to manage the impact of secondary trauma on workers' lives. And so I really like to say as we begin that this is a training that has both like cognitive elements. So we'll be like learning together concepts, some new concepts that we'll be applying to strategies that you're already probably familiar with, things that have impacted you as a worker. Um, and so there's a cognitive aspect to the learning, but there's also an experiential aspect to the learning. And in order to kind of maximize the experiential impact, a couple of things. One, if you have the capacity, I'd encourage you to turn your screen on so we could see you, and then also utilize your audio to respond so we can create some kind of a dynamic engagement in the training process. And then the other thing is just to know that these experiential pieces are by invitation, not demand. So it's okay when there's an experiential part of the learning to just observe or to pass or pause. These are all ways of like engaging the material. One of the ways we want to make that clear, the reason is because anytime we're working with this idea of trauma or secondary trauma, just the concepts themselves can be create responses in the nervous system, and we really want you to be like co-responsible for the management of your own engagement as we move through this learning process together. So my contact information and our website is activateresiliency.com. I wanted to talk a little bit about the founding metaphor that's at the core of the way we understand how secondary trauma spreads um, in the workforce. So we like to use the metaphor of a wildfire. And so we say that secondary trauma spreads like a wildfire. And what we mean by that is that when you engage situations in your work setting that have traumatic impact, it might be the trauma of clients or the broken systems we work in, or think about all the overwhelming changes that are currently happening in our culture. Um, we now know because of brain science that we don't just wear down in the face of that, but actually the content and the nervous system activation that's present in the content of the trauma that we're engaging actually jumps across the brain-body barrier and rewires our own nervous system with the trauma that we're engaging. So the trauma spreads like a wildfire would spread across the landscape. So it will move from the people that you're working with or the systems that you're working in deep into your own nervous system. And then you go back into your team culture, and the trauma can spread from your activated nervous system into the systems and the nervous systems of the people around you. And then, even more tragically, we go home to our own home settings, and this secondary trauma, this wildfire of secondary trauma, can spread into our homes and begin to create traumatic impact on the people that we love the most because of the good work that we do. Now, a lot of this material became clearer as we began to understand more about how the human brain, body, and nervous system works with the onset of interpersonal neurobiology and new brain science, which we're going to learn some about during this training. These are the four theories we work to kind of consolidate all the work we do. But it really wasn't neuroscience that first created the idea of the wildfire. This wildfire has been happening for as long as humans have been doing human service work. In fact, there was evidence that this wildfire was occurring in my own work very early in my social work career. I was trained at the University of Chicago Social Work School back in the late 80s, early 90s. And my first job was to work on the south side of Chicago in a group home with the residents were all young African American women who were homeless and pregnant. And my job was to go in as a social worker and to engage them in trying to get Medicaid coverage, trying to get networks to support them through their pregnancies. And I was basically a white guy with a tie, and I had a brand new Corolla and a brand new degree, and I was driving down into this neighborhood the, to try to make a difference. And I think it was about the third Friday night of my work there. I was driving home, and my partner, who's a really awesome hearth tender, was making dinner. And something that night was slightly off about the dente quality of the pasta that he was making. And what happened in the next few moments in my kitchen was evidence of this wildfire, but I hadn't been given any concepts to know how to understand this, largely because that wasn't a part of our clinical or scientific knowledge at the time. But what happened is I began first protesting the pasta with vocabulary words that I had not known 3 weeks before. I mean, I'd already started to adopt the language of the young women that I was working with as I protested the pasta in my own kitchen. The second thing is I was not moving my body like a white guy with a tie. The young women I'd been working with had like lots of activation about their situation and what was happening to them. And they often expressed themselves with like high intensity movements. And I was in close proximity to them. And that way of moving transferred right into my kitchen. So I was moving my body in uncharacteristic ways. And then the third thing is that the culinary dilemma, the fact that the pasta wasn't correctly made, really was not the thing that was operating in the core of that interaction. What I know now is that just became an opportunity for me to discharge 3 weeks of traumatic material that had stored in my lower body and nervous system that I had not been given any skills to know how to track or manage. So, in order to kind of understand more about how this wildfire of secondary trauma spreads and works, we really need to look deep inside of our own selves and systems, but also to look to other traditions to understand how other people who've experienced high degrees of traumatic threat or difficulty have managed to cope with this reality of trauma, secondary trauma, and the hope of building resilience. So it's really important to acknowledge that it's not just recent science that has brought these concepts that we're going to be working with this afternoon to light. I've had the privilege of working here in Western Montana and live on the Flathead Reservation with a number of different tribal peoples and indigenous communities. And there is really powerful wisdom that comes from the 7 generations of genocidal threat that have occurred in this culture to indigenous people and the wisdom with which they've approached dealing with trauma and secondary trauma that are also part of this material that we're going to be learning and working with. So when you see like images of native peoples, oftentimes you see these images like this one, of the beauty of the bison range at the top of Ravalli Hill. But when we talk about understanding things from an indigenous perspective and the debt we have to understanding through their experience, it's also the fact that we can identify with their current suffering and watching some of the ways that they create power and resiliency. So I like to rely on the wisdom of Jennifer Finley, who's a tribal council member on the Flathead Reservation and also a poet. And Jennifer writes this poem in which she imagines that she was part of the Salish people that were transitioned from the Bitterroot and then put into exile up on the Flathead Reservation initially in 1880. I don't know if you're familiar with that history and its specificity, but this was a very tragic genocidal action in which people were removed from their own home cultures and then moved to a place that was foreign to them. Many of the treaties that they were moved through were broken right away, and even more of the resources to live and survive were stolen from them. But Jennifer imagines addressing her children as she's moving through this transition. And the language of this poem really has a kind of consolidated understanding or knowledge. Many of the principles that we teach are referenced through this narrative. So just let me share it with you. She says, "The day we left the Bitterroot Valley for the Flathead Reservation, I said to my kids, look at your arms connected to your body. Look at your feet connected to the ground you walk on. You are connected to everything. You are made of the land and the trees, fish, deer, and clouds are made of your ancestors. You're always connected to someone who loves you." So, a lot of what we'll be working with in this training is understanding how we can reconnect an awareness of our bodies through understandings of brain, body, and neuroscience, reconnection with the natural world and its power to regulate, and also the need to create dynamic connections with each other in order to really build power and resilience in the face of such overwhelming direct trauma and secondary trauma. So I wanted to give you just a quick overview of the origins of our work. I like to say it was a organic, sustainable product of the Missoula Valley. So about 8 years ago, I got a call from Mary Pat Hansen, and Mary Pat is the director of First Step in Missoula. And First Step is an organization that has nurses and therapists that does direct intervention with children and adults that have been the subject of sexual assault and domestic violence. So they're first responders to these horrific events of abuse. Um, and Mary Pat had gone to a national conference with her team, and this was like 8 years ago or so. And at that conference, they said, you need to do something to protect the welfare of your workers. And when Mary Pat got back, she called me and she said, Andy, they told us that we needed to do something, but they didn't tell us what to do. So I was like, well, why are you calling me? And she's like, well, Andy, I've always reached out to you when I don't know what to do, meaning that we had had a history of collaborating together. Many of the families I saw in my clinical practice had been engaged and supported by First Step. And so Mary Pat and I came together to collaborate to create an intervention that the curriculum we're going to be working on in this training grew out of, that we deliver to her team for 90 minutes a month for a year. And one of the reasons I reinforce that collaboration with Mary Pat is the important message that whenever you're moving towards dealing with trauma or secondary trauma, you always want to have collaboration or connection. You need co-regulation and your own support systems as you move toward it if you're going to actually have effective team transformation. So Mary Pat and I had her team. We worked for a year, and at the end of that year, we had these dramatic results. Her workers were saying things like, I finally understand what's happening to me, And instead of harming my family because of the work I do, I feel like I'm growing strength that's making me a better parent. Their team coherency and shared support, their coordination and collaboration with each other was also highlighted as a positive outcome. Um, and then the second outcome we saw is that they are on a multidisciplinary team with the police department, Missoula County Attorney's Office, and Child Protective Service. And the amazing thing is that these other organizations with which they collaborated saw this dramatic impact on the first step workers, and then they wanted these resources in their own organizations. So we began to develop this curriculum, and then we won a National County Association's award for our work with Missoula County Attorney's Office. And then we've basically spent the last, basically 8 years now just spreading this material throughout Montana and throughout the four-state area, because these ideas, once you start to engage them and learn the wisdom of them, have that same dynamism of infectiousness and potency, and they actually move across the same nervous system wiring patterns as the wildfire of secondary trauma does itself. So let's take a second and just clarify what we mean by trauma. Trauma, the word trauma actually has a history, right? It's like we used to think of trauma as defining a particular event, like something would happen that would cause you to go to a medical center to deal with a wound or a trauma or something that harmed you. It was a discrete event. But back when we began to notice the impact of war and the overwhelming experiences that people experience serving in the military, especially during the Vietnam era, we began to notice that there were patterns of responses in veterans that were consistent when they'd been exposed to certain kinds of events. And so then trauma began to be understood as not the single events themselves, but the impact of the events in the brain, bodies, and nervous systems as those who'd been exposed. Then a bit later, in the late 70s, early 80s, we began to see those same kinds of systemic impacts in people that had been subject to developmental trauma in terms of child abuse and neglect. And then we started to understand that trauma wasn't just one event, but trauma was the way our systems respond to these events. And then another key thing in terms of the definition of trauma to understand is the shift between the 20th and the 21st century. Think about the 21st century beginning with the 9/11 experience of this traumatization of the whole American culture, like on one beautiful September morning, that kind of created this recognition that trauma could be impacting a whole culture. And then in 2020, when the COVID pandemic broke across the entire world, we saw the traumatic impacts occur throughout cultures, right? Throughout education and throughout our medical systems and throughout our commerce and throughout all of these systems that created traumatic impact. So in some ways, we could say that the 21st century has become the century of traumatic awareness, awareness of the profundity of the impact of trauma. So the impact on the worker is that as the worker, you try to keep showing up at work and presenting this you know, positive, professional face to the world. But because of the ubiquity of trauma in the systems that we work in and throughout our culture, running in the background of people's experience in their nervous systems are these high levels of traumatic activation. The wildfire continues to move and to spread. And so what we want to do is to begin to understand, how do we effectively engage this and work with it? So many of you may be familiar with the idea of the trauma-informed approach. This was an approach that began in about 2014 to help give guidance about how to work with trauma that's in our work cultures. So take a look at this image of this woman and the words trauma informed. And I'm curious, just as you see it, if anyone could sort of share or describe, what do you take the trauma informed approach to trauma to be? Like, what is trauma informed in your mind? Anyone have a thought about that? What's trauma informed?
That our patients have baggage, have been through things,
Yes,
and then when we take care of them, knowing that and not saying harmful things, and if let's see, there's my camera, and if yeah, if that makes sense, don't say harmful things. Be kind to people, treat them like we'd like to be treated, sort of. Yeah.
got it. That definitely is describing the trauma informed approach. Like, so when you're dealing with the patient, for example, that has this affect on her face, you want
Hmm.
to think about the early childhood experiences or other experience of traumatic impact that are impacting how she's experiencing things now.
Yeah.
And additionally, like you said, you want to be mindful that you're not creating re-traumatization by the ways in which you treat her in the current moment. So that's definitely a trauma-informed approach. Anyone else, like, what does trauma-informed mean to you?
I think just yeah, it's very similarly our own understanding of what may have happened, and kind of being aware of that, and then also the sensitivity towards that, and not putting our own biases on it, essentially. So, just trying to take it as and meet them where they are, essentially, and just by looking at this person, I would think that she's very clearly upset. There's some sadness there, and you can just see something has happened that is, very much affecting her, and treating her appropriately in that moment.
Got it. Yeah, so these are really good descriptions of the trauma-informed approach. And
Mm.
so one of the things that's interesting, right, is that the trauma-informed approach has been utilized so much in the last number of years. Like there are trauma-informed schools and medical clinics and legal clinics, courtrooms, that sometimes I feel like the concept can be kind of overused or used in a sort of cliche way. I say sometimes I feel like my barista at the Loose Caboose is actually treating me in a trauma-informed way every morning. But to exemplify that, I pulled this image off the internet of a medical care team that describes themselves as trauma-informed. So take a look at the image. What do you see in the image that indicates the quality of care that you would get in this clinic in terms of its trauma-informed qualities? What do you notice?
Well, they all have their arms crossed, which is usually kind of a sign of, it's, um, I don't know, I can't remember. It's just not the right, it's not the best approach. You're closed to them, essentially.
Right.
And
So
so as
this posture versus
yeah, it's the posture.
a trauma-informed posture would be more open, right? Like
Yeah,
reaching towards. Like
yeah.
what other evidence do you see in the image?
They're not really standing together either. They're kind of away from each other, so they're not working as a
Right.
team. Maybe there's not a lot of unity there.
Yeah, this turning away rather than this team alignment. Excellent noticing. Other stuff that you guys see, you all see.
So the doctor kind of has like an attitude.
Got it. Okay. So first of all, the white guy in the middle, like there's a sort of patriarchal element to this where there's the male with the expensive medical equipment and the white coat, and then the women are kind of like wing women in a certain way. And then look at the affect on his face. Like, how would you describe that affect?
I would
Some
describe it as stern.
stern, right? Sometimes people think of it as haughty. Notice just the pursed lips, these details that convey that. Um,
Also, the uniforms are a little bit off-putting in a sense that it like creates this other.
Yeah, totally. So it's like the uniform quality of the care removes you from being able to like um uh, be connected to the worker or the healer in a way that feels much more humanly or engaged or connected. Another thing, Lydia, that goes with that is like notice the racial dimensions here. Like these are all majority culture folk. And I
Mhm.
think about the years I've worked on the reservation, how oftentimes in the professional class, there'll be like imported majority culture people, and people don't often get to receive services from Black and Brown or other people that look like them. And I've used this slide so much that I really hope I never meet these people, because I'm just using this as a teaching device, right? I don't actually know what's going on with them, but well, one of my favorite comments about the image is they're also blocking access to the ER. So in terms of it being a trauma-informed approach, we in our work always try to take these older concepts or traditional concepts and shake them up a little bit to get more value out of them. And so we replace the word trauma informed in our work with the concept of trauma engaged, because what I really want to convey, and that's hidden in the formula that we'll get to by the end of this training, is that engagement is what's required when there's trauma or secondary trauma. So take a look at this physician and her client. Like, notice the qualities of engagement. Like, look at the collaborative quality of the eye contact, or the way that hand connection is reassuring and communicates this idea of, I've got you. Or look at the proximity, almost this perfect, close enough, but not too close, not far away. And then watch the way their bodies are mirroring each other, like how the kiddo pulls away with her right arm, and then the doctor's shoulder kind of moves back. So trauma engagement, just like the engagement I was doing in my work in those first 3 weeks of social work with those young women in the group home, engagement requires our full selves. It requires a dynamic connection to support the other humans that are experiencing traumatic distress. So the impact of that is that this increases the risk and the impact of secondary trauma moving into workers' systems. And so in the past, we would have these strategies like self-care or EAP programs to manage the impact of this. And I've become very cynical about those frameworks for several reasons. One is because it often leaves the impact of secondary trauma up to the individual alone to manage. You go through this natural process when you're doing effective work of having this secondary trauma embed into your own nervous system. And then the message is take an EAP referral and go fix your pathology and come back ready to work, or, go solve it and return healthy and whole. And what our work is about is to help create changes inside of systems that individuals can participate in, so the recognition of secondary trauma and its impact can be dealt with from inside of the organizations themselves. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we understand the why we're susceptible to secondary trauma. I like to talk about the fact that it's not our role in particular in our work settings that make us susceptible, or it's not even the fact that we're human. It's really our mammalian nature that makes us susceptible to secondary trauma. And so we ground this understanding in the work of Jaak Panskep, who's an affective neuroscientist. He's since passed away, but I got to study with him and trainings I did at UCLA. And he did this amazing research in the Netherlands, layman's version being that he had a rat lab, and then he had a bunch of graduate students who were rat ticklers. And as they would stimulate and tickle these rats, I know it sounds very Disney-like, what they determined is rats, which are mammals with very small brains, had an ability to express the impact of tickling with as much complexity as mammals with larger brains, like humans. So the implication of his research is the thing that makes us mammalian is that we're affectively, in terms of emotional connection, highly porous and dynamically engaged. And he basically identified that there were 7 affective states that all mammals shared. So take a look at this image of this mother-child kind of dyad. Like, even though this is across species, like we can identify emotionally with what's happening in the image. Like, notice the tender care of the mother through her posture and nose, scent, engagement, and then the vulnerability of the fawn. Or if you look at this image of this elephant group, just by looking at the posture and the way of moving and the subtle holding of head and movement, this expresses affective material that's familiar to us. Like, you know what it's like to always have to keep that head up and be in the lead, the middle child kind of moving along, making it okay for everyone, and that little one coming along behind. Or how about this one? Like, if you're a human service worker and your supervisor comes in is like wanting to know why your paperwork isn't done. And then this is often our response, right? So that affective porousness is part of what makes us susceptible to this spread of secondary trauma. So what we've done in STAR-T is we've taken PANSCIP's 7 affective states and we've condensed them into 3 affective systems. It's the threat system, the drive system, and the nurturance system. And these 3 systems are at the core of how we understand how we engage and work with secondary trauma in workers' lives. So let me just describe a little bit about how these systems work. So the threat system, this system evolved very early in terms of mammalian development, because as a mammal, I don't have any effective external protection from danger. I don't have a shell or like poison quills that can keep me safe. So hardwired deep into my midbrain, in my affective brain, is this threat system that basically has 2 functions to help secure my safety. The first function you can see in the top part of the image, right? When you're exposed to any like danger or threat, there's this burst of intense energy that's used to resolve the threat. But the problem is when danger persists, that intensity of response can't be maintained by the mammal. And so then the system collapses down, and you can see that shadow just underneath the siren image. That's that disassociative or freeze or kind of checkout response that is also part of how this protective system works. I like to give examples from COVID to describe a little bit about the threat system, because I feel like we all went through that traumatic experience, set of traumatic experiences together. I remember like the first time I went to Target after the shutdown. I'd been shut down for like 6 or 8 weeks. I hadn't been in public. I didn't know how to wear a mask, or I didn't know what 6 feet of distancing was. And I needed deodorant. So I came to Missoula to the Target that I'd been to 100 times before, probably 1,000 times. And I remember driving onto the parking lot that day and feeling like even the cars were parked in weird distance, like Twilight Zone kind of ways. And then I got out onto the parking lot and I'm trying to get the mask on for the first time. And I don't know what up and down is and where the loops are. And I'm walking towards the door and I notice parents pulling their children away from me because I'm too close. And then I get into the Target and I'm looking for air vents and deodorant, like all at the same time. And then finally I get the deodorant and I'm up at the checkout, and the guy is like scanning and sanitizing, like between each item. And so as a mammal, I'm getting pretty activated at this point. I try to make some connection happen. So I make eye contact with him and I say, "Hey, this is going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. And then he sanitized it immediately. And he looked at me and he said, I'm scared for myself, but if I was your age, I would be terrified. And I just remember like my whole threat system like activated. I did not wait for my receipt. I was out and, you know, just didn't go back to Target for quite a while, this high activation. But then think about the other impacts of COVID, how it went on and on, like one more new viral manifestation after the other. And I think about supporting telehealth workers during that period and how people would talk about how they would subtly start to check out or disassociate. Um, you know, there'd be double screens. They'd be doing Zoom work and then they'd have their phone or other screens, or they'd talk about how in their cup they wouldn't have coffee anymore, but it'd be like red wine or bourbon, and they're just sort of down regulating as they're moving through this process of danger and threat. So those are examples of how the threat system works. The green system, the drive system, this is that go energy that's at the core of mammalian experience. Like drive for kids is play. I mean, think about how kids just naturally play. You don't have to teach them to play. Or like if I take my dog to the river, we don't have to have a consult in the passenger side of the vehicle that he's going to jump out and chase things. That's just what he does. That's his drive. And so for many workers, especially human service workers, medical workers, people that do human facing work, drive is what we bring to work because drive is where we get our purpose and meaning. And the problem is much of the work that we do is so infiltrated with red, and there's such a need to drive that work just becomes red, green, red, green, red, green, red, green, like all of the time. So the third system, the blue system or nurturance system, this is the system that was designed to help the other systems work better. So the idea was a mammal would be exposed to red, threat, and then another mammal would come in with the blue, and then the green or the drive would work better. It would be more regulated, more effective. So it was like red, blue, green, like red, blue, green. Like that's how we were designed to function. But the problem is, in a lot of our work cultures, we don't have the blue embedded in the system. Like the blue is what you go do on your own, when we actually need the blue in proximity to the red itself. And so what we've done in Star T is we've developed ways of bringing the blue into the work culture. So one aspect of blue, there's actually two categories of blue that we'll be working with in this training that are at the core of our work. One are what we call awareness skills for blue. And these are like self-regulatory skills where we get to understand how our brain, bodies, and nervous systems are working. So as we're exposed to threat like red, we actually have resources to regulate our systems. The other one would be connection skills. How do we connect effectively with coworkers and in the systems that we work so we don't spread the red when we talk about threat, but there are effective ways of connecting? Like, look how this girl and her dog are creating blue together. Like, when you look at the image, where do you see the blue in what they're co-creating? Where's the blue in the image?
I see it in their smiles.
Yeah, thank you. The number one response to this slide is they're both smiling, and then I can't help smiling myself, right? It proves Panskip's point, right? That when mammals connect, there's affective sharing. They're both smiling, blue. Any other evidence of blue you see?
I'd say the way in which she's petting the dog's head,
Yeah, Lydia,
reaching out
notice.
for connection.
Yeah, she's reaching, and notice how they're also collaborating. The dog's head is moving toward. She's got this kind of open-handed, playful, engaged. Definitely blue there. And then also look at the proximity again, like in that other slide of the doctor and her patient, they're close but not on each other. They're not too far away. So we need proximity, but we also need boundary when it comes to engaging connection in our work setting. And then again, look at the body mirroring. Like notice how she's moving toward and the dog is moving toward in the central part of the image, and then the back kind of moves away. These are all evidence of the way we share blue with each other. So in order to access like the wisdom that's present in all that we've been talking about today, we developed this formula that's at the core of how STAR-T works. So let me just walk you through our formula. This is at the core of all we do. So basically the red box, that indicates that trauma or threat is always with us. Like we're not going to solve it. We're not going to etch a sketch trauma out of the human experience. Trauma is. I mean, we've made a lot of new energy and effort into understanding the dynamics of trauma, but we'll never eradicate it. What we're asked to do is to engage it. And that's why there's this plus sign in our formula. Like resilience or power is spread through the heat of engaging the traumatic material itself. Like think about it. In other models, there might be a minus sign, right? There's trauma at work. Get as far away from it as you can, like grab your yoga pants and a smoothie and just make it all better. Or, it's like a move away from the heat. And we're really big on like leaning in and engaging the heat of the trauma itself, because that's what we need to deal with the ubiquity of it in our own lives and the culture around us. But that we engage it with these two kinds of skills that we just named, like awareness skills and connecting skills. And if we become more adept at these two skill sets, and what we'll be doing in the next few sections of this series of trainings is the next one, we're going to be working on awareness skills themselves and developing 3 awareness skills that we can practice at work. And then the third session will focus on the connection skills. When we can engage these skills as we're connecting to the traumatic material, the end result is growth. It's like resilience. Resilience isn't grit. It's not like, just keep in there and doing it more. It's actually an alchemical outcome from applying connection and regulatory awareness to the heat of the trauma itself. Another way we talk about resilience is it's post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth. You're probably familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what the vets help us understand, or those children that we showed the image of developmental trauma helped us understand that trauma unresponded to turns into a pathology that's diagnosable, post-traumatic stress disorder. But that doesn't have to be the case. Like, look inside the image of that tree. Those rocks that are at the core of that, those are the things that in every work setting, and they're unique for each person, create that charge of the traumatic threat, the need for the red. If we don't respond to them, they are going to create despair, create overwhelm, create the absence of wellness in our workforce. But if we surround those same issues, those same elements with engagement, connection, and skill building, then the remarkable thing is that very threat itself becomes the foundation of growth for the entire tree. Another image I like to use to describe post-traumatic growth is this idea of an artesian well. Like rather than collapsing down into this shared traumatization with our clients and the cultures that we live in, if we learn how to practice these skills of awareness and connection, right up through the dilemmas themselves, this kind of artesian well of like power and growth has the potential to emerge. Now going back to some people would be like, well, that's such a Pollyanna way of thinking, or, there's a lot of privilege in that. But I got to say, what I have seen repeatedly in terms of the way this formula works, a lot of this has come from watching um, many of the clients that I've worked with throughout the years who have much more intense trauma stories than I have had, powerful experiences of generational threat, abuse and neglect, removal from their birth families. Many of those kids, if they can find effective connection as a part of their journey, maybe it's a yaya or an 8th grade science teacher or a coach or a mentor, or if they develop some kind of body awareness skills, like think about basketball and our team in our league, or the ubiquity of like all of the skateboard parks that have been spreading across our state, learning about hip hop dance and how to regulate our nervous systems. The kids that I've worked with that have those resources built in to their process of journeying with their trauma or threat have this way of expressing remarkable resilience in the face of incredible harm and threat. So we're really following their lead in trying to figure out how to then deal with and activate power and growth in the face of secondary trauma itself. So I want to save a little bit of time at the very end for feedback, but what I wanted to invite you into in this next few minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, is an experiential activity that ironically, typically we utilize at the beginnings of things. So the fact that we're doing it today at the end is just by virtue of the way our training got started. But typically, this arrival activity is an activity that many of the organizations we work with utilize at the beginning of team meetings and any kind of engagement that helps to reinforce the power of this formula. So it's a 4-step activity. I would just invite you to do it with me. And you'll get to see and experience yourself some of the potency of the awareness and connection skills that we're talking about. So when we're arriving, like in a Zoom meeting or in a real-time meeting, the first thing we ask participants to do is just move your awareness out of the Zoom and into the room that you're in. So just try that now. Notice how that shift in awareness can bring you out of that Zoom and into the room you're in. And then bring your awareness, you can do it with eyes open or closed, to your body as it's making contact with the chair or the floor. So take a second just to notice if you're kind of up off the chair or the floor this afternoon, or if you're kind of collapsing down into the chair or the floor, or if you have that sense of being met by the chair or the floor. So just notice, we're not fixing anything, we're just tracking where we are in our physiology. And then the second step of arrival is to orient through the portals of our 5 senses. So take a second to first activate the sense of sound. Just noticing the sounds first far away, and then closer in. And then shifting to your skin, noticing the sensation of where the air is meeting your skin, the temperature, or the humidity. You might want to utilize touch, like your hands, to explore like your clothing or the fabric of the chair or the surfaces that you're working on, just to help your body through the senses orient. Then as you breathe in with an intentional breath, just notice any smells associated with this place. And on the exhale, notice the connection with taste. Maybe just trying that again, the breath in, and then the breath out. And then finally, just bringing your eyes up into the room you're in, noticing things like the qualities of light in the room or shadows, color, shapes. If a mammal was orienting in the wild, they might stretch behind their left shoulder to look for a predator or above. And we know that those stretches actually help regulate the back body. It's part of this process of orienting and regulating in the system. So the third step in arrival is to bring connection to each other. Now, that's the one piece that's hard to do on Zoom because we can't actually make eye contact. But take a second just to bring your awareness to each of the screens that we see and just notice and send out energetic connection to the people that we're sharing this training process with, just to connect. And then the fourth step of arrival is moving back to yourself as we're now ending, but in an arrival, we'd be beginning the activity. But just in this moment, notice what your mood is, or your energy level, or your level of connection or disconnection from this work that we've just done. And just think about one word or a word and a motion or movement that describes something about you just now. Okay. So we'll try this one word check-in. So I'll start. I'm feeling really smooth. So just try that with me. Smooth. This mirroring is an attachment strap. It helps bring connection. Smooth. Gotcha. Who else could share the one word? It'd be great if we could all take a shot.
I can go next.
Okay.
I'm feeling determined.
Determined. And Lydia, can we see the motion again?
Oh yeah.
Determined. Okay, try that with Lydia. Determined.
Determined.
Yeah, and then another thing we'll learn later is sometimes the motion itself is even more powerful than just the word. So to try that motion, just to feel that with Lydia. Gotcha. Thank you. Who else? What's your word?
Calm.
Calm. Calm.
Calm.
Calm. Gotcha. Thank you. Who else? Your word.
I would say content.
Content. Now, as we mirror it, try to get the tone and intensity, because that's a lot of where the mirroring happens. Like, could you try it once more and then we'll try to repeat it with that tone and intensity?
Content.
Content. Content. Content. Thank you. Welcome. Who else? What's your word?
I was gonna say calm as well, so I'm just gonna have to go with it because I couldn't think of another one.
Got it.
Yep.
And what? Show us the movement. Like, it'd be great to see.
Calm. I don't know.
Got it, you guys? Let's try it.
Calm.
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 Then just try it once more. Calm.
Calm.
Gotcha. Excellent. So, so as I was saying, many of the organizations we work with start with this arrival before like a team meeting or like in a medical clinic before they do their rounds. And what this replaces in many organizations is what we call the narrative check-in. You know how the narrative check-in goes, right? You get a bunch of people together and people are like, how are you? And like most people don't respond authentically. It's like, okay, or whatever. And then many times it'll just be a lot of details, narrative details about what's happened, like, oh, my cousin's birthday and the Costco cake and the snowmobile accident like last weekend. And like there's a lot of narrative, but we don't know anything about how that lands in terms of the regulatory states of the workers. And so the reason why we start with this arrival is that first two steps are awareness skills, right? It's like I'm paying attention to the regulatory aspect of my body. I'm orienting my body in the room, and then I'm connecting. Again, think about connecting in terms of indigenous cultures. I don't know if you've worked it with indigenous communities, but like anytime I'm going to present with an indigenous community, if I have 3 hours worth of material, the first hour and a half is all going to be connecting. It's like elders talking, storytelling, engaging. And the thing that's always amazing to me is I can always get my 3 hours of material done in the 90 minutes after all that connection happens, because we're building a container by which we can absorb and regulate the experiences more deeply. And then the one word check-in and the resonance, it gives us just enough data about where each other are. And that resonance creates that feel felt, which allows a mammal to feel met and secure. So we're actually beginning our meetings with both self-regulation and co-regulation as we enter the material. And what we've noticed is that when teams take the risk to start these ways, what happens next, just like red, blue, green, tends to go better, deeper, richer, more coordinated, more engaged. So I know we just have a few minutes, but curious if you have thoughts or questions about the material as we've kind of rolled it out in this first introductory lecture, experience of learning.
This is great. I really appreciate this. And yeah, no, I love this is all, well, trauma informed care, not new, but this is new. So I really like this.
Thank you. Is there, like, thinking about the elements of it, is there a particular element that, kind of like grabbed you or like that piece especially?
Well, the awareness and connection part, because I've been dealing with some trauma that happened to my family. And so this is, I kind of look back and how did we make it through okay? And we did a lot of this. So yeah.
Gotcha.
So,
So it's,
so essentially I had a Vietnam vet nephew who committed suicide about a month and a half ago and been dealing with that. But so we can't do anything about the choice he made, but we can help ourselves heal. And the awareness and connection is huge. And that's kind of what we did without knowing that's what we were doing.
yeah, this material, right, is just really mammalianly coherent, and we're just like bringing it to mind, right? So like when you have a huge traumatic experience like that, both
Yeah.
of these are really essential. Thank you.
Mhm.
Anyone else like comments or question?
I like switching it from trauma informed to trauma engaged. I think trauma informed is kind of cold, kind of like I'm educated to help you. I'm gonna do so good or whatever. And this engagement idea is like so much. It like we're gonna work on this together. You're not alone. That type of a thing. And I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, think about it as from attachment theory. Mammals, we are hardwired for connection. Like we need connection. And I think all of the principles of trauma informed individually are wise and great. But sometimes what happens is they just get introduced like another lens through which we stand back and look at a client's experience and kind of objectify them, right? So it's like bringing into that we is really key to our work. And that's where the plus sign in is. Well. Anyone else?
I love the one word check-in. I've been utilizing it. We've tried it with our team and for team meetings, and I'm using it with different groups that I'm providing services for, and it is remarkable to see the impact, even with just a quick exercise, a quick skill. You notice the connection that it builds with the team and with giving people space to be how they are in that moment.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think the more authentically we engage with that, the more we're able to get a sense for that collective nervous system and hold space for one another where we're at.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Lydia. I think the thing that we've really like to reinforce with that, it's like there's bravery in like really authentically engaging with the one word. But
Yeah.
part of what helps to create the safety is also the bravery of the resonance and the mirroring. And when you get those two happening, it does create a very secure space within which people can function. So thanks
Yep.
for practicing it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for teaching us.
Mhm. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to our next session where we'll focus on 3 of our key awareness skills. So they'll be very practical with a lot of strategies that you can continue to employ. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. It was a
You're
pleasure.
welcome.
Appreciate you.
You too. Take care.